my name is Jenny and welcome to my knitting podcast. I'm coming to you today from the beautiful, if somewhat rainy, northeast of England, and I am so excited to talk to you about 10 Colourwork sweaters that I just can't wait to get on my needles. So let's jump right in. So maybe a few caveats and contextualizations before we start. I picked kind of 10 with maybe one bonus pattern, Colourwork patterns to share because that seemed like a manageable number. I really loved putting this list together. I came up with this list after knitting this sweater. This is my Autumn Alpine by Caitlin Hunter at Boyland Knitworks. I finished this about a month ago. I've been wearing it a ton. I was quite intimidated to knit this and then was surprised not just at how much less scary it was than I expected, but also at how propulsive it was. I found it really addictive to, do one pattern would drive me on to the next repeat, and every time I finished a row I was just itching to do another. I really slowed down knitting this sweater once I got past the Colourwork because stockinette stitch is not my favorite to do. So as I was finishing this, but even as I was starting it, if I'm honest, I was spending a ton of time on Ravelry looking at other stranded Colourwork projects, and I've put together this list out of that. Now, will I be able to knit 10 Colourwork patterns in the next year? Definitely not. In the next 5 years? Maybe. I'm not necessarily committing myself to knit all 10 of these, but I wanted to share them because I love seeing the patterns that other people recommend. So maybe, some of these will inspire you to get excited about Colourwork, about stranded Colourwork in particular. But I also wanted to share these because I just find all of these patterns so inspiring. And I think even if I don't knit each one individually, they're all part of what's making me excited about Colourwork, and they're part of what's driving me on to be excited about the next pattern and filling with ideas for colors and combinations and things like that. So I've picked 10. I've got some notes with me. I did set some boundaries in order to get it down to 10 because, of course, the internet is full of so many amazing Colourwork, stranded Colourwork knitting patterns. So some kind of limits that I set myself just to help make picking a manageable number a bit easier is that all of these patterns are size inclusive. I think that, making sure a pattern is size inclusive is certainly something that's important to me before I start knitting it. I don't like the idea of knitting something that other people might not be able to knit. I think this is something we all have to decide for ourselves. I realize that other people have different opinions, but that's how I feel. So these are all size inclusive through a 60-inch bust plus positive ease if the pattern calls for positive ease. These are all, with kind of one exception, stranded Colourwork knit in the round. That I like working in the round and limiting it to stranded Colourwork because there's so many good intarsia patterns, there's so many amazing mosaic knitting patterns, so many other ways that you can do Colourwork in a pattern. So I thought limiting it to stranded Colourwork would be helpful in this case, but it is not traditional stranded Colourwork. This is not Fair Isle Colourwork, and in fact that was my final criteria, is that all of these are kind of visually non-traditional. They're all slightly more modern or more playful and quite graphic. So those were kind of the rough guidelines that I was giving myself to pick these patterns. Hopefully you'll be able to see those guidelines in effect as I show you the patterns individually. I do have some notes with me just so that I don't get any of the details wrong or misrepresent anything for you. So I'll be looking down at those occasionally, and I'll try to share pictures as we go along so that you can be as excited about the patterns as I am. I have organized these, I'm a bit of an overthinker, so I've organized these by alphabetical order of the pattern designer's surname, where possible. I think in one case I couldn't find the surname, so it's by the first name. This just seemed like I was trying to organize it thematically, and then I was overthinking that, so I'm just going surname. My surname starts with Z, so I feel like if this is putting anyone at a disadvantage, I'm on that team, I'm with them, I'm always last. So this seemed like a fair-ish way to organize this. So I'll try to share as much information as we go along, but if you have any questions, please do feel free to leave those in the comments below. and I will stop babbling at you and start talking about the patterns. Starting at B, I wanted to first talk to you about the Sheep Camp Sweater by Jennifer Berg, who is also the native knitter online. This pattern is a really popular one. I've seen lots of people knitting it. I have loved so many of the color combinations that people have knit up. I've seen some people doing it with their own hand spun. Oh my gosh. So this is definitely a quite popular pattern, but I think so deservedly so. So to give you a few of the specs, this is a DK weight pattern. The suggested yarn is Native Fibers Arctic DK, and the gauge for this is 22 stitches and 25 rows for 4 inches, 10 centimeters in the charted pattern, so in the stranded color work, which is pretty standard for all of the patterns that I'm going to look at today. They're all saying make sure you have the gauge in the stranded color work. In order to get that gauge, the pattern suggests 4 and 4.5 millimeter needles, which are US 6 and 7. And this pattern has 9 sizes. So it goes from finished bust size 36 to 70.5 inches, which is equivalent to 91.5 to 179 centimeters. And it suggests 6 to 8 inches or 15 to 20 centimeters of positive ease. So a really good size range, 9 sizes, like that. And I love this pattern because I think the geometric pattern, the geometric stranded pattern motif is beautiful. I think it's the kind of thing you could absolutely wear every day, but it's also very special. And I think in particular, this sweater has such an amazing shape. It looks like a shape that would, I think, flatter a lot of bodies. I think it would make, I don't like the word flatter. I think it would make a lot of people feel very comfortable. I think I would feel comfortable in that shape is I guess what I mean. It looks like the kind of thing that would be easy to wear. You wouldn't have to be tugging at it. It would just drape really nicely, and it looks comfy, you know? It looks really comfy and fun. So I don't have a ton more to say about that other than it also looks very chic, like fun and chic at the same time. I think it's a really beautiful pattern. I really want to knit one of these. Hopefully we'll be putting one of those on my needles soon. Secondly, next up, we're jumping to Catherine Clark, who is Love is in the Making on Instagram and online. And this is the Ixchel pattern. This one, I have to admit, was not initially in my list. I initially kept this off to one side because it looked way too intimidating. But there are a few things that I want to say about this being intimidating, and I'll circle back to those at the end. I decided to include it. Maybe I'll have to work myself up to it a little bit, but it's important to have goals. It's important to have challenges. I think that's one of the things that's really fun about knitting, is there are always new challenges. So, Ixchel pattern by Catherine Clark. This is a fingering weight sweater or sport weight. She has patterns available with full size ranges for both fingering and sport. So that's really exciting. That, you know, makes it much more flexible. You can maybe knit with something you have in stash. I think that's really thoughtful. And the recommended yarn is Magpie Fibers Swanky Sock. I haven't made a note of the gauge for the sport, so I will put that in the air here, hopefully. But in the fingering weight version, she's calling for 26 stitches and 34 rows. That's using 2.75 and 3.5 millimeter needles, which are US 2 and US 4. And then in the 2 version, she has 8 sizes in fingering and 8 sizes in sport. So 16 sizes overall, which I think is really amazing. And they go from, in the fingering, they go from 32 inches to 60 and a quarter inches, which is 80 centimeters to 151 centimeters. In the sport weight, it goes from 33 and a quarter inches to 62 and 3/4, or 83 to 157 centimeters. And it's recommending very little positive ease. So quite a snug sweater. I think it's saying about 2 inches, up to 2 inches of positive ease. So a bit of a snugger fit, but a beautiful range of size ranges. A beautiful range of sizes available, I should say. So circling back to the complicated nature of this pattern, one of the things that I thought that intimidates me about this pattern is that the color work is all over. It's not just on the yoke, so you will be working color work in smaller circumferences on the sleeves, and it's a bit less of a repeating pattern, and so it wouldn't be as easy to memorize. I was looking through the page for this though, and I have to admit, one of the things that convinced me that maybe I could actually knit this sweater, maybe it wouldn't be so hard, is the designer's attitude to it on the pattern page. I just think her attitude is fantastic. It's so reassuring. It's like a really comforting way to approach the pattern, because she, in the notes on the page, she writes, and I'm just going to read this to you. She says, "Above everything, please take your time. This is a practice in slow knitting," which I think would definitely be true. She says, "Mistakes are barely noticeable in a sweater like this, but can also be fixed with duplicate stitch. Enjoy." And I think that those 2 points, that mistakes are barely noticeable in a pattern like this, and that you can fix things with duplicate stitch, are both really reassuring, because here's the designer, who is obviously a very, very accomplished knitter herself, saying that mistakes happen and that it's not a huge deal and you can fix it and it won't ruin the sweater. And I think that that is an attitude that I try to take forward with all of my knitting, and I think that it's really reassuring to see that kind of messaging coming from the designer themselves. That makes it feel less intimidating to me. So I did want to share that, because I think that that's, in case that makes it less scary to you as well. So Ixchel in either fingering or sock. I don't have any yarn in mind for this, but I feel like, you know, maybe in a couple of years I'll dedicate a good chunk of time to this. That's the other thing, is that this would take a good chunk of time, but a really great exercise in slow knitting. So the Ixchel by Catherine Clark. Thirdly, the third pattern that I want to talk about is London Dusk by Tamy Gore of Narrow Path Designs. I really like Tamy Gore's patterns. I think she has a couple of stranded colorwork sweaters that I could have easily swapped them into this list. There are a few that I'm really excited to knit. I picked London Dusk because I think it's this kind of amazing combination of being quite graphic and almost representational. Every time I look at it, I feel like I'm almost seeing a kind of image coming forward, but it is just quite graphic and quite minimalist. I think you could wear this a lot. You could get a lot of everyday wear from this, and it would be special without being too noticeable that you're wearing the same sweater over and over again, which is something that I really like, because when I love a sweater, I want to wear it every day for a couple of weeks. Once you finish knitting it, and you're so proud, and you just want to wear it all the time to get that joy. So I think that this would suit that really well. I think it would suit a lot of contexts really well. You could go to a meeting in this, you could go to dinner in this. So that's why I picked this Tamy Gore pattern in particular. This is a fingering weight pattern. The the gauge is 25 stitches and 30 rows to 4 inches, 10 centimeters. And the needles that she suggests to use to get this are 3.5 and 3.75 millimeters, so US 4 and US 5. The suggested yarn is wishbone yarn flax flower and grenouille co sock linen. Both are used. As an aside, I come from the French part of Canada. I come from Montreal, and when I was a child in French schooling, grenouille was one of my absolute favorite words to learn, because I think that ouï ouï sound is so great. So grenouille co sock sounds really good to me. I want to get that yarn just because of the name. That sounds really fun. So that was wishbone yarn flax flower and grenouille co sock linen. This pattern also has 9 sizes, a great size range again. This goes from finished bust circumference 32 inches to 64 inches, which is equivalent to 81.5 centimeters to 162.5 centimeters, and it's designed to be worn with 8 to 15, 20 to 38 centimeters of positive ease. Is that right? I've got 2 inches, 5 centimeters of positive ease written down as well. I wonder if that is for the sleeves. I will confirm that because my notes are confusing, and I will clarify here. But definitely covering that 32 to 64 inch bust circumference. And I already talked about why I like this one. I also like that on her Ravelry page she has several different sleeve lengths represented. I think that could also have to do with the kind of yarn that she's suggesting. If you are using a linen yarn and you knit this as a short sleeve or a 3/4 sleeve shirt instead of a sweater, then it would work really well for different seasons. I'm a coldie. I would definitely knit it as a full sleeve woolen yarn warm sweater, but I think if you're in a slightly warmer, more temperate climate, that might be a really nice alternative to knit it in linen and wear it for longer parts of the year where you are. So that's London Dusk by Tamy Gore. The fourth pattern that I want to share with you, the next pattern I want to share with you, is Beetle Magic by Katie Green, who is the Green Bean podcast on YouTube here, and they also have an Etsy shop with all sorts of great stuff, lots of illustrations of British breeds and washi tape and fabric and just lots of good sheepy goodness. So I do recommend that. This is also a fingering weight sweater. The suggested yarn is Rivernet's Severn and Rivernet's Chimera. And Rivernet's Chimera, I believe, is a fractal spun yarn, so a yarn that changes colors a few different ways. It has to do with the way that it's spun, where you end up with a longer repeat, which is why it's called a fractal yarn. But it has barber pulling and lots of really beautiful subtle color changes. You can see that in Katie Green in their sample pattern. I think that's really beautiful and nice to have a pattern that only needs one of those skeins, because those skeins can sometimes be a little bit more expensive, the fractal spun yarn, but really beautiful. So that definitely appeals to me. And I think that using a fractal spun to represent beetles with their kind of iridescent shells is brilliant. I think that's really exciting, and you could do all sorts of different colors and get really exciting effects, while also being, again, I think a sweater that you could wear again and again and again as a kind of everyday sweater, and it would suit lots of different occasions. The gauge that this pattern is calling for is 28 stitches and 36 rows for 4 inches, 10 centimeters, and it's suggesting a US 2 or 2.75 millimeter needle. There are 16 sizes in this pattern. I think this was the pattern that had the most sizes available, partially probably because it has one of the smallest pattern repeats, and so it's possible to make so many different sizes, but still I think that's really generous to take the time and the money to tech edit so many different sizes. So this goes from 20 inches to 68 inches, which is equivalent to 51 centimeters going up to 173, and they suggest choose a size which is 2 to 6 inches or 5 to 15 centimeters more than your largest circumference, whether that be your chest or your hips. So also nice to have some guidance on if your bust isn't your biggest measurement, how should you measure that sweater. I just think that the guidance here is really clear and really helpful. Did I want to say anything else about this one? I talked about the fractal spun yarn and the barber pulling in that color, which can be so interesting, and the iridescence. So a really exciting pattern. Oh, I really want to knit this one soon as well. So that's Beetle Magic by Katie Green. Next up is another Caitlin Hunter design, so the same designer as for this pattern. This is the Halibut sweater by Caitlin Hunter, also of Boyland Knitworks. She runs Boyland Knitworks. This is a DK weight sweater, and the suggested wool is Kelburn Woolen's Scout. The suggested gauge, or gauge is really a suggestion. The gauge that this pattern calls for, because I keep wanting to say suggested gauge, the gauge that this pattern calls for is 20 stitches and 28 rows. The suggested needles, because the needles are suggested, are 3.75 millimeters and 4 millimeters, which is US 5 and US 6. This pattern has 10 sizes available, leading from a 38-inch bust circumference measurement up to a 74-inch bust circumference measurement, which is a 96.5 up to a 188 centimeter. And it is suggested with 6 to 8 or 15.5 to 25.5 centimeters of positive ease at the bust, and 1 to 2 inches or 2.5 to 5 centimeters of positive ease in the sleeves. So quite nice to have a guidance for ease in the sleeves as well as the bust. That's not something that I would normally think of, but of course we don't all have the same proportion of bust to upper arm circumference. So I think that that is helpful to think about. And this one, I mean, just what's not to love? Who doesn't want really giant fish on their sweater? I knew about halibut before I saw this sweater, of course, and I had heard of halibut. I've seen halibut on menus. I had never looked them up. They're so large. They're enormous, which I think really adds to the kind of quirkiness and fun of this pattern. I really love the idea of walking around with giant fish on my Colourwork sweater. I think that it's really nice that there's also a personal element. Caitlin Hunter talks on the pattern page for this about how this is a pattern that reminds them of the town that they come from in Alaska, which is known as the halibut capital of the world, or the halibut center of the world. It's important to know these things, and it just seems like a really fun, playful pattern that I would wear a ton. So that's Halibut by Caitlin Hunter. Okay, up next. Now this one, as a bit of a side note before we jump into this one, I generally think of myself as being more of a Christmas holiday person than a Halloween holiday person. My family when I was growing up wasn't really big on any of the holidays, but at Christmas time, because we had time off school and because my parents could sometimes get time off work, we'd go and visit family in other provinces, and I always really, really liked that. I was really big on seeing the extended family and going to visit them when I was a kid, so I always really loved that family time around the winter holidays. But as I was compiling this list, there's not a Christmas sweater to be seen, and there are 3 patterns here that could technically be classed as Halloween patterns, and I love them all, and I can see myself wearing all of them a ton. So maybe I'm coming around in my adult life to be more of a Halloween person, or maybe I need to get more into Halloween, and that's what these patterns are showing me. So the first of the Halloween patterns, and the next pattern I want to talk about, is the Boneyard Sweethearts sweater by Stephanie Lotven, who is also Tully Bean Knits. This is, this pattern is just so much fun. This is a DK weight pattern, and it calls, as I was preparing to read these out loud, I was just going through to see if I, making sure that I knew how to read all of the yarns, and I'm completely embarrassed to say how long it took me to figure out. I was saying, Lolo did it? USA DK? It's Lolo did it. It's Lolo did it, right? Maybe someone can confirm in the comments. I'm guessing that this is Lolo did it USA DK, which is a great name for a yarn. I just don't know why I had a bit of a mind block on that for a while. But the gauge that this calls for is 20 stitches and 28 rows in the Colourwork motif as usual. And the suggested needles are 3.5 millimeters and 3.75 millimeters, which are US 4 and US 5. There are 10 sizes available in this pattern to fit a bust circumference of 32 to 68 inches, which is equivalent to 81.5 to 173 centimeters. And the suggested positive ease of the bust is 2 to 6 inches or 5 to 15 centimeters. I think this is so much, I think this is a really playful but also grown-up pattern that you could wear and make people smile. I can't remember the last time I actually waited in line at the bank, but I feel like waiting in line at the bank wearing this sweater, you would make people smile. It's a smiley, contagious sweater. It's really playful with those tall, lanky skeletons and the adorable ghosts at their feet. I think that the colors that this is knit in are also really playful and fun. When you look at what colors other people have used really fun colors. I think someone even knitted up with glow-in-the-dark yarn for the skeletons and the ghosts, which is such a great idea. I have not actually seen where you can buy glow-in-the-dark yarn, but I feel like that's something I need to do, is figure that out so that when I do this sweater I can do it in glow-in-the-dark yarn. That just seems make people smile extra. So that's, yeah, I think that's what I wanted to say about that one. I just love it. I think that the ghosts are great. The little, they almost look like pets. I don't know why that makes me think that, just because they're tiny in comparison to the skeletons, but really fun. I haven't been mentioning as I go along, but I know that Halibut and Boneyard Sweethearts both also have accompanying hat and cowl patterns that you can purchase if you like these motifs, but knitting a whole sweater in it doesn't seem like your jam right now. So I know that those are available. I haven't checked all of these patterns, but definitely other options in case the sweater isn't the thing that you want to be knitting right this second. Next up, the next pattern that I wanted to talk to you about, I think is the newest, the most recently released pattern, and that is the Polina pullover by Teti Lutsak, who is Teti's Knit Garden on YouTube. And this pattern is getting a lot of attention, I think. It's completely understated and gorgeous. It is knit in a sport weight, and the suggested yarn is Jeweled New Zealandsk, Lamuld Studio, and Studio Donegal Darney. Both are used in the pattern. I'm sorry, I think I got the pronunciation of that first yarn terribly wrong, but you know, it's all written down on the pattern page, so easy to find, and I'll put details for all of the patterns below in case you want to figure out what that was and you didn't understand my terrible pronunciation, which would be very understandable. The gauge that this pattern calls for is 24 stitches and 26 rows to 10 centimeters or 4 inches in stockinette in the round. I always think that it's helpful when designers make a note that you do want to do your swatch in the round, since our tension is often different in the round or knit flat. So that's wonderful. The suggested needles are 3 millimeters and 3.5 millimeters, which is a US 2.5 and a US 4. And there are 6 sizes available in this to give you a finished bust circumference going from 95 centimeters up to 174 centimeters, which is 38 inches up to 69.75 inches. And those include what she suggests is at least 10 to 15 centimeters or 4 to 6 inches of positive ease. So lots of these patterns have kind of similar guidance for positive ease. I think the Ixchel was the one that had the least, and maybe did Tamy Gore's pattern have a little bit less positive ease as well, but in general they're all kind of suggesting 6-ish inches of positive ease. I did just want to read you a little bit of the description to this, because I don't think that I can do it as much service as Teti did, and I think that her kind of context for this pattern is really important. I put this pattern on the list and, you know, definitely intended to knit it before I read about this, but reading it, it just gives a bit more of a connection to her and to the sweater and to a broader context, and so really informs my love of this pattern now that I know. So she writes that Polina pullover is inspired by the naive art of Ukrainian self-taught painter Polina Rayko. Everything in her house, walls, ceilings, doors, and fence, Polina covered in enamel-painted drawings of fantastic birds and flowers, Christian iconography, and the artist's own interpretations of her dreams and life events. And I would definitely Google this painter, because there are images available online, and it really does look like the most incredible house. So the description continues. Unfortunately, most of her work is lost due to the flooding of the house after the destruction of Kakova Dam in June 2023. Sadly, the war keeps destroying the cultural heritage of my homeland. So this is my humble love letter to her. I believe that Teti Lutsak is a Ukrainian knitwear designer living in Amsterdam, I think. So I thought that it was really lovely of her to share this. I imagine that it's not always easy to share these kinds of personal contexts to patterns, but this seems like a really lovely tribute, and looking at the paintings or the pictures of these painted walls and fences and everything in this house online also filled me with a ton of color inspiration, because lots of those paintings were very, very colorful, and it kind of got my fingers itching to incorporate some of those colors into the pattern when I hopefully get around to knitting it. So that is the Polina pullover. I do encourage you, that there's more in the description on the Ravelry page. I do definitely encourage you to go and check that out. And what a beautiful pattern. All right, moving on to M in our alphabet. So the next pattern that I wanted to present to you is the Witching Hour. This is by Hannah Mann of Dear Ingenue Knits, or just Dear Ingenue. And this is a pattern that I have seen and wanted to knit for years and years and years, and again, always thought that it looked too complicated. I had never knit a Colourwork sweater before, and that one seemed like too difficult a one to start with. This is another one of the Halloween-ish patterns. In my mind, I'm categorizing this as a Halloween-y pattern, and I need one. So this is a DK weight pattern. The suggested yarns are Haiku by Skasel Simplicity Solids and Tonals, and Haiku by Skasel Kobasi DK, and Haiku by Skasel Sueño. I again may have gotten the pronunciation of those terribly wrong. Please do feel free to correct me. I think that pronunciation and names in particular are really important. I'm very happy to be corrected and helped with those. Please don't be shy about that. So the gauge for this pattern is 18 stitches and 24 rows, and the suggested needle is a US 6, which is a 4mm. This pattern, I think because the motif is a bit bigger and more complicated, only has 5 available sizes, but it's still covering a fairly good size range. So there will be fewer sizes in between each of those, but it's still getting you from a 30-inch bust to a 65-inch bust, with approximately 5 to 10 inches of positive ease. And she makes a note that this is intended to be worn wide and loose with snug fitting sleeves beginning at the elbow. So the sleeves start a bit lower and then are snug from the elbow down, a quite specific fit. So I think it's helpful that she's made a note of that so that you aren't surprised as you're knitting along in case that's not what you're anticipating or looking for. But really fun, you know, witchiness is always a good way to go, I think. Those long beaks also put me in mind of the kind of plague masks from the bubonic plague, and plagues definitely have a slightly different meaning for all of us, I think, since the pandemic. For a while, I think this would have really bothered me, and I was not interested in this pattern for a couple of years because of that reference, but now with a bit more distance, not that the pandemic is fully over, not that COVID is completely gone, but, you know, I think being able to incorporate some humor back into the darkness is a helpful thing for me, at least. And so this sweater is again one that I really want to knit, and one that I think would be a challenge. The designer does make a note that some of the floats are quite long, and so this isn't necessarily a beginner stranded colorwork pattern. I'm not sure that this is one that I'll knit right away, but definitely something that I want to work towards. Definitely one that I want to get around to eventually, and have a good think about color, because that could be really fun with this one as well. So that is The Witching Hour by Hannah Mann. Moving on to tonally quite a different pattern in terms of the tone of the sweater, but very playful in a different direction, I think, is the Cowgirl Crop by Maral, Mokri, Mokri, I'm sorry, I've got that wrong, Maral Mokri. Again, please do let me know if I've got the pronunciation wrong on any of these. I think that names are important. And their Instagram, I was looking up just to give as much information as I could in a succinct way. I was looking each of these designers up on Instagram. I'm not big on Instagram, so I had to look some of this up, and I just feel like this designer has a fabulous sense of humor. I want to be friends with her. She seems great because her Instagram handle is knitting ruined my life. And I imagine that it hasn't, since she is still knitting, but in a way hasn't knitting ruined all of our lives, but also made them way better at the same time. So knitting ruined my life on Instagram. This is another DK weight pattern. The suggested yarn is Kindred Red Rad DK and the Wandering Flock Mohair Silk. Some of these words are getting harder to say as I go along. The gauge the pattern calls for is 20 stitches and 28 rows, so very standard for a DK weight. We've seen that gauge come up a lot. And the suggested needles are 3.5 millimeters and 3.75 millimeters, which is equivalent to a US 4 and a US 5. This pattern again has 9 sizes available to give you a body circumference of 36 inches up to 68 inches. There aren't centimeter equivalents, but I will put centimeter equivalents up here for us just as a guidance for those of us who use centimeters more comfortably than inches. She notes that it's designed to be worn with 4 to 6 inches of positive ease. Including this pattern might have been cheating a little bit, since the pattern as it appears is both cropped and has short sleeves, so it's not strictly a sweater, and that was one of the limits that I put myself. But I think it would be quite easy to lengthen the sleeves and lengthen the body a bit if you wanted this to be more of a classic sweater, a bit of a warmer garment. But I had to include it because I think that it's so much fun, so playful. I did own a pair of cowboy boots as a child. My mom is from BC, and lots of her side of the family still live out in Western Canada. And when we went to visit when I was very young, some family in Calgary, we bought me cowboy boots, and I freaking loved those. I have not owned cowboy boots or a cowboy hat since then, since I was probably about 4 or 5, but I still remember those boots very fondly, and I think this sweater would be so much fun and just really playful. You could have so much, again, I think she's done such a good job in her sample at picking colors that really show you how much fun you could have with this, that you don't have to stay inside the box of giving those boots and hats, you know, typical cowboy boot or cowboy hat colors, whatever typical colors for that are. There probably are lots and lots of color ranges now, aren't there? But you could have a lot of fun with this. Pick really bright pinks, pick really bright, you know, neon colors. I think that that's a really excellent guidance and is really inspiring for the kind of sweaters that you could make for yourself, or the kind of tops. Again, this is another one that's really good for lots of different climates, lots of different times of year. Because I'm a coldie and because I live somewhere fairly chilly, I would probably lengthen it to make it a sweater, but I think it's really cute as a crop. I mean, the way that her sample is just really great. So that is the Cowgirl crop by Maral Mokri. My final, but for a bit of a bonus pattern, is the Nocturnal jumper by the Petite Knitter. I couldn't find her last name, but I know that she has shared that her first name is Waichen. So if anyone knows her surname, if that's available and I've just missed it, then please do let me know. I apologize if I've missed it. If it's just that she's chosen not to share her surname, then all the more power to her. I think privacy online is really important, and setting boundaries is important, so that's completely fine. She lives, I know, in an archipelago in far northern Canada, and if you follow her on Instagram, just where she lives looks absolutely beautiful. Looks like quite a tough, you know, quite a hardy place to live, very cold, but there was a part of me there is a part of me that's always wanted to move farther north in Canada. I don't think that will happen now, but I definitely get a bit of wish fulfillment out of looking at her Instagram page. And the sweater that I've chosen from her is my third kind of Halloween themed jumper, and that is the Nocturnal jumper. This is another DK weight sweater knit in Wool Dreamers Mota. The gauge called for is 18 stitches and 24 rows, another standard DK gauge. and the suggested needle is a 5mm or a US 8. This pattern has 10 sizes available, and it goes from sizes for a bust circumference of 91 centimeters up to 200 centimeters, or 36.5 to 80 inches, and the suggested positive ease is 10 to 18 centimeters, 4 to 7 inches. So again, falling right inside that kind of roughly 60-inch bust plus positive ease that at least I understand to be the current standard for size inclusivity. And this pattern, again, by this point, by pattern 10, you can probably see that there are some common themed and tonal links through all of these sweaters. I really like a playful sweater. I think the next thing I knit needs to be quite playful and fun. I love this. I think that this is playful in a way, but I've knitted in quite grown-up colors, and I think that I want to do something that's a bit more off the wall, a bit more playful, that might make people smile. The cats and their postures on this really make me smile. I really like the bright orange behind the cats. In my understanding at least, the petite knitter tends to use more neutral colors, more natural wool colors, which I do. I love natural wool colors as well. I almost never get bored of those. They're just gorgeous. But it's quite nice to see someone step outside their usual, I don't want to say comfort zone, because I don't, who knows what her comfort zone is. Maybe her choice is a better word, her choice of more neutral colors. But I think that the orange really pops, and it makes the cats look both scary in a Halloween-y way and fun. So that's another one that I really, it just feels very pumpkin-y, that orange, and that seems really appropriate to me. I very rarely pick the colors that are suggested in a pattern, but I think that orange is maybe key to that pumpkin-y, Halloween-y feeling. So if I were to knit this one, I think I might go with that. So those are my 10 stranded colorwork patterns, knit in the round. I believe that most of these are knit top down, but I did have one bonus that I wanted to share with you. And the bonus that I wanted to share with you is the Stepaside sweater by Jennifer Beale, who is knitjbeale on Instagram. And the reason that I'm including this as a bonus is partially because I was already at 10, and 10 seemed like a good round number rather than 11, so this is a way to sneak in an 11th without changing my nice round number. But this is also, I'm also making this a bonus because I think that the construction of this is really different. This is not a typical knit in the round, top down or bottom up stranded colorwork pattern. I think that the construction is a bit more piecemeal here, and you start reading through the comments of people who've knit this sweater. It sounds like it might be both quite complicated, and if you trust in Jennifer Beale and you just follow the pattern, it does work out. So even if you're like me and looking at this makes your head hurt a little bit and you can't quite conceptualize the full construction, certainly I don't have the pattern yet, so I have trouble conceptualizing how exactly this came together, but I am, also very happy to suspend my disbelief and follow a designer and trust them, and it looks like it's worked really, really beautifully for everyone who's knit this pattern so far. So both a kind of stranded colorwork pattern and a slightly more complicated construction, but I think that the motif is really great. I think that the fit that this is giving, the shape that this sweater is giving, is really interesting and unusual. Who doesn't want to knit something a bit unusual? This is, I believe, the thickest yarn weight of all the patterns that I've talked about today. This one calls for a Ran weight, and this suggested yarn is Fleece and Harmony Signature. The gauge that it calls for is 17 stitches and 23 rows in stockinette stitch worked flat. So that is a note. I believe that most, if not all, of the color work in this pattern is knit flat, which is something that scares the heck out of me, but that I also feel like would be good to learn, because you see other people talking about it, and once you get the hang of it, it opens up so many other doors. So stockinette stitch worked flat, possibly color work knit flat as well. and then seamed or joined or picked up to knit together as you go. The suggested needles, it calls for 3 suggested needles, 4.5, 5, and 5.5 millimeter, which are US 7, 8, and 9 needles respectively. And this sweater again comes with 9 sizes. 9 seems to be a fairly common number for these good size inclusive patterns. So that goes from 98.5 centimeters up to 181.5 centimeters, which is equivalent to 38.75 up to 71.5 inches. And it is intended to be worn, she notes, with 15 to 28 centimeters or 6 to 11 inches of positive ease at the bust. And yeah, again, just a really interesting, kind of unusual construction. It has pockets. Who doesn't want pockets? I really, and they look like really interesting pockets that maybe cover both sides of the waist. I mean, it's such a neat construction. And they do look like pockets. Sometimes sweaters have pockets in there. They seem a bit more decorative to me, like not a comfortable place to put your hands. This does seem like the kind of pocket where if you were just running outside for a second and you didn't want to grab mittens or something like that, you could just kind of tuck your hands in there while you run out to do something, and it would actually keep your hands warm, and it would actually be a comfortable position to hold your arms in. So those are my 10 size inclusive stranded colorwork patterns plus 1 maybe knit flat, slightly different construction bonus. I hope that you've enjoyed these patterns and found them as inspiring as I have. Every time I look at this list, I feel like I come up with like a bit of an idea of which patterns I'll actually get to knitting first, which ones I'm going to cast on, and it changes every time I look at this list because they're all really fun, and depending on what mood I'm in, I want one or the other sweater more immediately. So maybe I will just have to knit all of them over the next, maybe it could be a 10-year long project. One of these a year would be a nice highlight, a nice fun poppy colorwork highlight each year. So that is where I will leave you. I hope that this was enjoyable. I hope that you are excited by these. If based on these you feel like there are any patterns that I've left out that really fit in thematically with any of these, or just seem like patterns that others might enjoy, please do feel free to share those. Please feel free to ask any questions, and I hope that you have a great rest of your day. I hope that you are either enjoying knitting something in colorwork or that this has maybe inspired you to pick it up. It just seems like a really, for me right now at least, it's the most fun that you can have while knitting. That changes. I'm a bit flighty. Everything that I'm knitting is the most fun right now. But right now, colorwork is pretty great. So thanks again, and I'll leave you there.